So we're very fortunate that not only Steve, whose retirement is indeed imminent, but also some of our past employees are willing to join us this morning to share some of their institutional knowledge. About the focus today is on how some of the comprehensive plans were formulated and some of the choices in terms of land use and policy were made. So we have with us today, starting at that end, Rose Petrucha, who was with us forever? I don't know, a really long time. I don't know.
7 years,
37
months, and 21 days.
Wow, impressive.
And
right, and has worked with all 4 of the jurisdictions during her tenure. Actually, I think we can say that probably about everybody here. So then we have Lorraine Duffy-Suarez, who's currently working as the manager of growth management for the school district, but previously was the county team leader and worked all the way back through zoning conformance and all sorts of good stuff.
1985.
1985, okay. Princess of Planning, yes. And then we have Ray Chiaramonte, who was our executive director until about 3.5 years ago, and then was the executive director of T-BARDA. But prior to executive director was assistant executive director and everything all the way down to a drafting
I think
event,
every possible job that exists in
Yes.
Atlanta.
So we're thrilled. Ray's here. And we have Steve. We all know Steve, spy team leader, but he knows everything about the county's land use plan. So we know a lot. So I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Melissa Dickens.
okay.
All right, so thank you all for being here today. So we had a bunch of feedback from the survey about what kind of institutional knowledge topics folks wanted panelists to cover. And the first question pertains to zoning conformance and zoning history in both the city of Tampa and Hillsborough County. And so I think we decided beforehand that Ray probably could go the furthest back. So we'll start with Ray.
Okay. Right, I'm just going to do the foundation, then Steve, everybody else can add in. I think one thing you have to understand about this agency is to go back to why it was created, and it had to do with zoning. When it was created in 1959, the reason it was created because it was completely haphazard. Most of the county had no zoning. In fact, I don't think people realize up to as late as the early 1980s, there were still parts of the county that weren't zoned. So you can imagine the chaotic land use pattern both in the city and the county with that, and that's why Sam Gibbons created the agency. I was here as a child, I can tell you, it was a much more attractive city than it was like in the 1950s. I mean, you just had haphazard, crazy things mixed together, not in a thoughtful way at all. So you have to understand that that was kind of the foundation when the agency was created. It was very controversial because the local people did not want an agency telling them what they could zone or not zone, because I'm going to tell you, most of the zoning was probably done by who you knew or who you were friends with and who owned different pieces of property. That's kind of the way it was done. And so going up even to 1982 without a lot of the county having zoning, there was 2 issues going on. One was there was a new zoning code, and the county had tried to implement that for, I think, 10 years to get the zoning changed to the new codes. They could never do it. And then there was now the new comprehensive plan requirements from the state in the late 80s that we had to have a comprehensive plan, and the comprehensive plan would override zoning. So somehow, and I don't exactly remember how the Planning Commission got charged with this, but they almost gave up on the county's ability to do it and decided to give it to us. And then this Office of Zoning Conformance was created, and Steve was part of that. One of my jobs at that time, they were actually moved to a different floor. There was 7 people up there. And I was in charge of that, and then some other things downstairs or something. I think you were upstairs.
Yeah,
right?
we were upstairs.
Right, so it was like a little separate office that functioned on a different floor to basically conform all the zoning in the county to the new code and to also conform it to the plan. Words can't describe how in detail, there was 180,000
180,000 parcels, right.
Yeah, you had to do like, it seemed like hundreds of them every day. You just constantly had these meetings out in the community, and there was all kinds of trouble. People still were resisting the plan. I mean, where you operate now is so much calmer than it was there, because the planning commission still wasn't accepted that much as being a vital part by some of our elected officials. You know, it was like, I really thought, they thought we probably wouldn't do the comprehensive plan and we'd be wiped out. So, you know, we didn't have a lot of support, but we did plug through it. Steve probably could take over from there and knows the details of zoning conformance.
Can I talk about
Yeah.
Tampa first?
Yes,
Because
please.
before the county
Right,
did
that's
zoning
true.
conformance, the city of Tampa and Hillsborough County both had the same consultant create their zoning code. I think his name was Leary Code. And that was done in about 83, 84, but they, as Ray said, they had not implemented. That is, everybody still had the old zoning districts, but this new code was out there. So I was in the city section of the Planning Commission at that time. I was a planner 1, and Lorraine Lynn was the head, and Margaret Connolly, who's now Margaret Tusing, now works in Manatee County. We were the 3 planners in that section, and we did zoning conformance for the city of Tampa, which is the same idea of what the county did. And we did this about 1986 and 87. We sent letters to every property owner. We did it, if you're familiar with the city of Tampa, zoning, it's atlas pages. Pedro, did you help us with that?
No, I work in the county,
County.
the terrace.
Okay. So each square mile is a zoning atlas page in the city. You know, A1, I, J, J7. You know where you are in the county by your alphabet and your number. And we broke the city into quadrants. We sent letters to people by quadrant. We had meetings out at churches, and everybody came up with their letter and saying, what are you doing to me? Oh, nothing, it's just lateral for you, okay. Then we went to city council meetings, and my job was to talk to everybody and tell them what atlas page they were on. And the city council went page by page. Anyone on A1, page A1, get up. And then you come up, and my job was to point to them their property on the overhead projector. And as Ray mentioned, zoning was not done by any plan at that point. So you had zonings that were commercial right in mid-block. So those would not have conformed to the comprehensive plan, so we would have recommended a lesser zoning. We didn't have the Burt-Harris Act at the time, so that was our methodology. We would just, whatever was the highest we could give you that was the least cut to you. At that time, the city council, Tom Van, I believe, he's still hawking for John Knott's Village. And he was the chairman, and he really ran the ship this way. If we were taking away your commercial zoning, he gave you a plan amendment. He initiated a plan amendment. And the city of Tampa initiated over 100 plan amendments on parcels, small parcels. So when you look at and those plan amendments basically have survived. I mean, so when you look at the city of Tampa's comp plan and you say, how the heck did this heavy commercial zoning end up right in the middle here? The answer was, it was zoning conformance. So we did successfully rezone everyone to a designation in the new code. It took us probably over a year to do that. We had meetings that went midnight. We went to the old Curtis Hickson Convention Center. As I said, maybe our methods were a little bit rudimentary by today's standards, that you had to have a gal sitting behind there pointing to the property, and I had to know what the person was going to talk about. I'd say, oh, that guy, oh yeah, that guy's got a commercial piece at the corner of Tampania, and oh yeah, that's him. So I had an innate knowledge of the city. Prior to that, I had driven around the county as a technician, the whole county doing land use, so between those two things, I memorized the city and the county. And after that was finished, I eventually moved over to the county section, and that's where the county moved on to doing their own zoning conformance.
That is correct. And Hillsborough County started its zoning conformance process from I think it was 89 we started.
Yeah, after the plan was adopted.
After the plan was adopted to about 1993. And as Ray was saying, we were in a separate office. It was myself, Lorraine Lynn, Kevin Menier, Bob Henriquez, who is now the property appraiser, Harold Hassan, Harold Bish, Julius Saavedras, and Bob Gassetta. So we rezoned 180,000 pieces of property in Hillsborough County over a 3-year period, 3.5-year period. And similar to the city, we had meetings or workshops out in the community. We would send out letters to every property owner telling them what their current zoning was and what they were going to. And then we had 2 meetings out in the community for people to come in to check their zoning to see if we can make any changes. Now, as Ray was saying, a lot of property was not zoned in the county for a number of years. Even though the county did have a zoning code that went back to the 1950s, and I have some of those here, a lot of people didn't have zoning. And if they were given zoning, they were just given the agricultural AR zone, which at that time allowed a lot of 5,000 square feet. You could go down to 5,000 square feet with your AR zoning. And the zoning at that time was really dependent on whether you had water or sewer or well or septic tank. That determined how big your lot was going to be. The old zoning code pyramided down. So in other words, if you had a commercial piece of property, it could go down to a multifamily zoning district, which was like an R3. And then that could go down to an R2 or R1. It just pyramided down. So if you had a C3 zoning, you could actually do an apartment building on a C3 zoning, even though it was commercial. And as Ray was indicating, there was no comp plan when a lot of these zonings were put in place. So commercial zoning was almost anywhere and everywhere, depending on who you knew and how much money you had, because that was Hillsborough County at the time. So we tried to give people a lateral transition from a commercial zoning, which was a C2 zoning for most part, but it allowed a lot of things that your current CG zoning didn't allow. So some people were, as they say, disenfranchised. And what we tried to do is give people close to what they had to the new zoning code, which was the 1985 zoning code that the county had just adopted, which that zoning code conformed to the new comprehensive plan that was adopted July 26th of 1989. But there's a story about that too, and Lorraine could talk how that was contested, and we had to go through a process to get that approved by DCA. But the zoning conformance process was, like I said, similar to the city. We had workshops out in the county, and we broke the county out into 10 sections. We started out in Carrollwood, Town and Country, Plant City, South County, Riverview, Ruskin. It was all broken out into 10 sections. And we went by section, township, and ranges. And when we got to the public hearings, which was 2 public hearings with the Board of County Commissioners, each hearing we went by section, township, and range. And people who felt that they weren't getting a lateral zoning were able to come up and speak to the Board of County Commissioners and seek a zoning that they felt was compatible to what they had today. The board didn't necessarily make people go through a plan amendment, but sometimes they did recommend that they do a PD zoning, or sometimes they upzone them. Most of the time they agreed with staff's assessment of zoning, and we just moved forward, and they weren't given anything higher than that. So we went through the whole county in about 3.5 years to try to change everything to the new zoning code, which the ones that you work with today, the AS1, the ASC1, the CG, the CN, that was the pattern that we tried to give people. It wasn't always equal all the time, but we tried to make people feel as comfortable as they possibly could. And once we got through that process, then the whole county was zoned. However, we did have to go back and make some changes because I think in 1994, the county's plan was finally approved by DCA after going through this challenge by the Sierra Club. And there were some areas that we had to make changes to so far as land use categories, and then we had to go back for about a year, about 95, and fix some.
The board at that time, actually we got a new board between 89 and 94.
Right.
And the 89 board was very pro-growth and increased densities. Those densities were challenged by the Sierra Club. They were approved, but the Sierra Club challenged those. The new board came in and they said, we want to update the plan even though it wasn't due to be updated.
Right.
They said, let's update it now. And in that update, the settlement agreement that was entered into with the Sierra Club as well, and the DCA settlement agreement, which is the South, we can talk about that later, was already done before we adopted in '89.
And you know, commenting on what Lorraine said, that really is, in my opinion, still the basis for the plan you have. That was the most progressive board I think we ever had, was that board in the early 90s. And the rest of my planning career, and probably yours, has been trying to protect what came out of that plan from being dismantled over the years. And we mostly did, but there was huge battles. You know, neighborhood planning came out of that era. A lot of the concepts that are part of our plan now came out of that era, and that settlement agreement being implemented by that very progressive board. Pam Iorio, Ed Taranchek,
Phyllis Buzansky.
Phyllis Buzansky. You may not know some of these people, but they were Jan Platt. They were very forward-thinking elected officials that happened to end up on the board at the same time. And for 2 years, I mean, it was a planner's dream, whatever we wanted to do. I mean, we got accessory units approved, you know, when I found out that my mom was, after my dad passed away, I couldn't have a second kitchen in the house unless you're rich. Then you can have like 3 of them, you know, if they're outside or something, but to take care of your parent, you couldn't have it. Went to Phyllis Buzansky, she said, oh, we got to change this. And, you know, that whole granny flat idea came in, I think it's still around in some form or another. But a lot of progressive things came out of that era that really the Planning Commission has kind of protected and tried to hold on to over the years. And it has been pretty successful in doing that against great attacks from all kinds of people. You guys probably remember the home builders when we wanted that livable communities element. They used to call it the lice.
Yeah.
That's how they would get up and start describing it like it was a disease that they had to stop.
Well, and Ray, that's actually a great transition to kind of the next topic that folks wanted to know about. So one of the things that I think constantly comes up, at least for the folks that work on the county plans, is how the urban service area is tied not only to the land use densities and intensities, but also public utilities. And it's really hard for people out in the community to separate the two. So maybe Steve or Lorraine, you all could talk a little bit about the development of the urban service area boundary, and also if there's been any, how it was developed and what kind of initiatives went into developing
Yeah,
it.
can I just give a little bit of a foundation for
Sure.
that?
Right.
I'm not sure
Yeah.
where you're from.
Yeah.
Basically, what happened was, prior to the planning legislation in 1987.
87,
Yeah.
Exactly.
What the developers did is they proposed 2 gigantic new plan amendments. They changed the plan as it existed. I think Rose has a paper with that really old plan on it, the 1990.
No, I don't have
plan or
it.
something.
Horizon 2000, but that was
Yeah, Horizon
before
2000.
that.
So what they did is they amended the whole part of South County that didn't really have that many urban densities in the plan. Then they added on, if you know where Fishhawk was, this other gigantic plan amendment of thousands and thousands of acres. And what happened then when the new comprehensive plan was envisioned, they made a policy decision that you would not undo any recent plan amendments. So they kind of set the stage for this giant urban service area, which frankly now is probably about the right size, but then it was overkill. That's why we do have some of the sprawled development and things like that, because it was so big. But that was the policy. So when we started to update the plan, we had to update it knowing that these two giant new amendments had just been adopted and they were off limits. Don't try to touch them. So that really
That's
created the boundary for the plan, and then the urban service area boundary came about because of what the densities were. The plan was already done, then we added a boundary to where it was 4 units or higher pretty much, or commercial or whatever, and that became the basis. That was one of the worst battles I think we ever had to go through. As you can imagine, the development community
Significant wildlife habitat.
did not want this urban service area. And it was like a war. We would go out in the communities, we had a big presentation. But the thing going for us was we had that more progressive board. That even it was kind of hard for them to do it, but they did do it. And timing is everything in life. And it was just the right things were happening at that time where we got that. I don't think there's that many other counties in Florida that have one that is held as well as ours has, as far as being
What ended
expanded.
up happening was this Big Bend area group was the group that did the South County plan. I met with a man yesterday who was part of the Big
Joe
Bend area. No, Wayne Davis,
Oh.
part of the Big Bend area group. And the man goes back to 1980 something, and I'm like, he goes, well, that's part of the Big Bend area group. And so they increased those densities in the south. When we came to adopt the 1989 plan, the Department of Community Affairs objected to all of those outlying densities of being 2 units an acre, because that's what they did. They made it 2 units an acre, way out. So we ended up having to do a settlement agreement with DCA, and that settlement agreement in 1989 was the creation of the RP2 plan category. And that required clustering of development and plan categories. Would anyone say that was a great plan category? No, because it was a negotiated settlement. It was because we could, as planners, were not allowed to reduce the density in these outlying areas. We just had to take it ahead. But the state saw it and said, no, you shouldn't have that. That density's too high out there. So the compromise was actually led by David Smith, who now is the planner with Ron Weaver, Stearns Weaver.
Oh, he reminds us of it every
I
day.
know. He, and I don't know if did you go up to DCA on that?
Yes.
Yeah. So they came up with that category with DCA. And yes, he has and I don't know if he's wrong or right, because I wasn't there. So that's how that category created. When we wanted to do the urban service area around 92, we drew it around everything that was 4 units an acre. But those other areas that had these like inappropriate densities is the only way I could say, inappropriate for the time, they became expansion areas. Like this is the next area the urban service area would roll into. So I don't think the expansion area concept has survived.
No.
But that's, so the RP2 category, and don't blame any of us because really it was a negotiation and that's what happened. And I will say Fishhawk Ranch DRI, being where it was, got approved, I believe on July 24th, 1989.
Yeah, just before, right?
Because the comp plan was approved on July 26th, 1989, and it was within days prior, and if you were approved DRI, then you were not required to meet the comp plan. So sometimes you're looking and say, what's Fishhawk Ranch, had that there? Oh, they were approved as a DRI, like the same week.
Can I ask a question? Why is the area of Thonona-Sassa, like around I-4 and I-75, not in the urban service area?
That we
Like
did.
Ray.
I sort of know.
Okay, well, okay, initially,
They made me
the
cornbread.
next idea that people, I don't even know what they were called, there wasn't a Big Bend area group, but there was a group of people in Thonona-Sassa that said, oh, since the South County thing we need to do the exact same thing in Thonona-Sassa. There was a very dense plan proposed for that area at that same time. that turned into kind of like a bloodbath war. But again, we had, I remember Pam Ioria was on the commission then, and it didn't happen.
Well,
And
don't forget
that's why the density
I-75.
stayed low. They couldn't get, well, yeah, I-75, that was another.
Prior to the comp
Yeah.
plan as well, I-75 was not built yet, for those of you who can't imagine. 275 that cuts through downtown,
That was right.
that was called I-75 at the time. And there was no outlying I-75. And that connection was being made in the mid-'80s, and the Planning Commission was directed to do a I-75 corridor plan, and where's Terry Egan? They had lots of, there's copies of that plan in the, in the library, and it was originally like these little intersection nodes that make perfect sense, these little bubbles. Well, of course, once the development community, the interested property owners got involved, it became a corridor. So even if you had no access, you got all this high density, and that took it right up into Nonasassa, Eureka Springs, and you scratch your head and you say, what are these mixed-use densities doing in an area where there's no water and sewer, and the people don't want that? Most of the residents didn't want it, but you can't break the corridor, so that's how you ended up with all this mixed use that went from county line to county line. It was part of the I-75
But didn't
corridor.
that get chopped out into Nonasassa and not have so
Pieces
much
of it
mixed
did.
use? Yeah.
Pieces
Like
of
around-
it
around
did.
the
Places and
airport.
actually
I
rational
remember
places they
the
have.
line, actually, that's one of the rare times that the line contracted. The
I-
USA line, because you and I went out to community meetings out there.
In the 20 years I worked here, I was part of 4 studies of I-4, and that included the Nonasassa,
Yeah.
to determine the proper density. I think there's another I-4 study going on right now.
Well, they had ULI come down.
Yeah, so anyway, that's where some of those densities.
I have to tell a little story about Lorraine that reminds me. This is when, I gotta tell you, this is something else that happened. People were either losing their jobs, like lots of people left throughout this planning process. We were here till like sometimes 3 and 4 in the morning, you know, working on these things. You just had to because there was something going on the next day. Some people are even could take the stress, or, you know, I remember one staff member like hid in the bathroom for 3 hours, worried about the executive director finding him.
I was gonna say, I wish you didn't tell people my secret.
No, but I remember Lorraine, I probably got kind of thrown into this, and that's where this guy's wife was there, and she was lying. But I remember I had to counsel Lorraine, like this woman said something, basically, I think you, in so many words, said that she's a liar right in front of the whole board and everybody.
Mrs. Zerfley?
Mrs. Zerfley, yeah. And I had to say, Lorraine, you can't call somebody's
I
wife
didn't say
a
she's a liar, I
Wait,
just said that's
it was
not
pretty
true what you
close.
said.
Oh, I thought you used language
They raised
stronger
boxers.
than that, yeah.
Oh,
Like
that's-
I said, you should have said she may have been mistaken, or some softer way of saying it. But it was a stressful
Call it as you see
period.
it, that's what I say, people.
Yeah,
Call
very
it as you
stressful
see it.
period.
And what's my other rule of thumb? When you counsel with people, and they come in your office and they want advice on what to do with their property, and you realize what their dream is and ain't gonna come through, you tell them all about planning and why we do this and what the area is, and then they leave. And they get down to the first floor and they went, she said no. They don't notice that until they get to the bottom of the elevator. She said no, because you've explained, you've had them buy it into the comp plan concept, and then they didn't realize. So if you use it as a teaching moment at every opportunity, when you have people come into your office and they want something, you kind of have to steer them to why that's not going to happen and why it won't happen, but where it could happen somewhere else and what their piece of the puzzle is. It works. I
I don't
still
know
do it
if you have
today.
such colorful characters, but I remember this one guy came in, Sonny Palomino, and the 2 Lorraines were there, I was in there, and he wanted to do something that just wasn't gonna happen. You know, I let them kind of take the lead. I'll never forget, the second the meeting was over, he goes like this to me, he says, how can you let those women tell you what to do and be making these policies and all this stuff? I can't imagine that happening now, but I mean.
So Rose, we'll turn it over to you next. So can you share some info on some precedent-setting rezonings or plan amendments, maybe in the city of Tampa, focusing on those.
Okay, well, I'll start with one of the first ones after I came to the Planning Commission. That was after the Horizon 2000 plan was adopted. And it was located in Hyde Park. And what was there at Swan and Rome, I guess it is, was primarily a neighborhood commercial. There were like 3 or 4 buildings there. But they were, the owners of the property really wanted to develop something more, to bring in more people to the community. So at that point in time, which was the late 70s, early 80s, Hyde Park, portions of it were being redeveloped. People were buying houses. Back then you could get a house in Hyde Park for like $15,000. And a lot of people were doing sweat equity in their homes. So the individual came in and they wanted to do an amendment to Hyde Park. And they wanted it to be much bigger. I think it was going to involve maybe 10 acres, 8 acres, 10 acres. And what they wanted was more regional development. They were talking about bringing in some junior department stores, lots more restaurants. And at that point in time, with a lot of people trying to do their homes and everything, this was almost like interior to the neighborhood. So it really divided the neighborhoods. You had those on the south side of Swan and those on the north side of the Swan. Some wanted it, a lot of didn't. And in the end, the amendment was made, and it was people screaming their heads off because it really, I mean, this was their livelihoods, it was their homes. They didn't want all this traffic coming in. So it was approved ultimately. There was a holdout. There was one individual right in the center of this whole entire development that did not want the amendment. They didn't approve the amendment, and that one little house remained in the center as the development occurred. But the rezoning also, what we paid attention to was to make sure that there was residential, because you were going to be facing the single family. So the intention was you would put the commercial in the middle, and then you would transition to the single family with townhouse developments around it. And that was very, very critical in the rezoning. So that one was kind of like an eye-opening development.
Is that Hyde Park Village?
That's what ultimately is the Hyde Park Village. Hyde Park Village. And of course now they're redeveloping, because that's what happens when you have commercial. Sooner or later, the regional department store that was in there left, and after so many years, and then you have to reinvent yourself. So that's, and also realize at that point in time, Ybor City really was not on the redevelopment stage. You had no international plaza, you didn't have a brand new mall, you didn't have anything happening in Channelside. So, it was looked at as more of a draw for Tampa. And then there's one other one that I want to talk about. Well, sometimes things are not by amendments. What occurred in the early 90s, there was a study that was done, the Periphery Housing Study, which identified areas around downtown Tampa. It was included the Tampa Heights area, Hyde Park, and the industrial areas around the port. And this study was really looking at how can we get more residential coming into the downtown, because downtown was really dead. 505 people are deserted this downtown. So this study that was done, and I think it took probably about a year and a half, it really identified areas for more intense residential development, and I think some amendments were done. I had always expected that the Tampa Heights project would really start first because it was closest to residential. And instead, it really started with the Channelside area. And when you think about it, the reason why that started is they could pull the land areas. It was warehousing, so you had much larger tracts of land that people could pick up and redevelop, as opposed to Tampa Heights where they had to pick up a bunch of small single-family lots. But that took almost 20 years for anything to come about from it. So I'm saying this to have people have faith that even though you do some studies and you never know if it's ever going to occur, it will come about.
Thanks for sharing that, Rose. And Steve, do you have anything to share about any precedent setting plan amendments or rezonings within the county?
Precedent setting.
What's
Or anyone
interesting,
else?
something that's interesting.
Or Lorraine or Ray?
Well,
I would
I
say,
think what
yeah.
we just talked about
Yeah.
before was the precedent.
Mhm.
Somebody talk about the Jurassic property.
Oh, that was a good one.
Oh, yeah.
That would be good.
And tell them
That's why I bought
tell them
that.
about the sign they used to have on their property, that
Only free
threatening
men
sign.
have guns.
Yeah.
Okay, well, there's a couple things. At the northeast corner of Dale Mabry and Van Dyke Road, and actually that whole intersection there was, first of all, part of it was part of a bribery scandal, which closed the trace, where in 1982, I believe, there was several county commissioners who were bribed to increase or approved high densities in it was called the Galleria Mall, and that they all went to jail. 3 of them went to jail. We only had 5 commissioners, and so the solution was to get 7 commissioners and now have a zoning hearing master where you couldn't directly bribe the commissioner, you had to go through a hearing master. So that process came about in the mid-'80s because of this bribery at that area. Now, in 1989, when the comp plan, and we mentioned we had a very pro-development board at that time, the Jurassic brothers owned this very large tract of property, and they came in and wanted to have regional commercial at that corner. And they went through a DRI. Over the years, they had that category, and they applied for a DRI for regional commercial. Now, if you're familiar with the Lutz community, and think of the Lutz community back in whatever year this was, what year was it? 1994. You know, it was, I mean, what you see out there now is definitely Idlewild Baptist. Actually, that's where Idlewild Baptist is, on that property. So the county, they came in with a DRI for over like 1 million square feet of commercial, and the county commission turned it down, their DRI. But you can't just turn down a DRI. You have to say what you would approve. So the county said, we'd approve 750,000 square feet of retail and commercial and office, and we're going to change the comp plan. The county commission initiated a plan amendment at the exact same time. We were about to do the 94 plan. They said, change the plan at this time so that DRI couldn't come back. Well, the Jurassic were not happy. And they sued one of many, many lawsuits they had filed against the county. And it went through administrative hearings, and it took like a year. The county brought in outside counsel, and I was saying right at the beginning of this that I ran, Gordon Schiff was with McFarland Ferguson, and he was the outside counsel, and I was his designated witness to talk about my portion. I think Ray probably talked for the county. I had boxes of material in my office. I mean, for a year, we were like on hold, and we had to testify to this and explain to this administrative law judge why this was the right thing to do. And in a comp plan, while in zoning, it's quasi-judicial, so it's a quasi-judicial process, and the standard is competent and substantial evidence. In legislative actions like the comp plan, the standard is more, is it reasonable, right? Isn't it? Yeah, reasonable is some other word, but, and so that was the test, was what we were proposing reasonable, which was a CMU 12 or something at the time. Yeah, that allowed 600, 750, you know. So the judge actually ruled in favor of Hillsborough County. And that was the first of many subsequent lawsuits over the environmental, but the planning commission was the witness, and I think that's the key, is when these comp plan challenges come up, we were always called upon by Hillsborough County's attorneys, and because the planning commission's not really getting sued, though they can drag you in, the county is. And so, you know, having your credentials and having a good reputation and telling the truth and the whole truth, and those are really, you can't buy a good reputation, you know? So that's part of what helped the county get through that, and this lawsuit was reduced. Now you know why that, when you look at it and say, why is that density still up there? Well, it was much up there. Is there anything else on that you want to say?
I mean, at one time, there was like, that could have been the Citrus Park Mall there,
Right.
actually, and that they started first, and that helped
Yeah.
too.
Citrus Park Mall was already approved, so the Jurassi's were further out. The Veterans Expressway was being planned, and it dumps off right there at the Jurassi's property.
And that's why that mall never got built.
That's
Because
correct.
Citrus Park.
Yeah.
Was built first.
Yeah, and
Had
it's-
been
There's just not enough population
Right.
to serve both malls, so we knew if one got built, the other one never would occur.
Yeah, I want to say something with unintended consequences, you know, be careful what you try to do in zoning conformance. You know, Rose mentioned Tampa Heights. When we did zoning conformance in the city, and if you drive through Tampa Heights, you see these very old, grand, big homes. Well, in the 70s and early 80s, the zoning in that area was multifamily, and those homes became boarding homes. And zoning on there for multifamily supported that. And so in order to stop that trend, there was, in zoning conformance, the comp plan wasn't that high a density. We took away a lot of that zoning. And unfortunately, that kind of left these property owners, and they bought them as an income stream as a boarding home, and now they couldn't, if you don't have it actually rented for more than 60 days in the city, you lose it. So if you had 5 bedrooms and you don't rent one, now you only have 4 bedrooms. And so that kind of led to more of a decline. But a worse example of that, and I don't know what the answer is, I still feel terrible about it, Sulphur Springs. Sulphur Springs had tons of duplexes. The zoning was duplexes. The population was so transient. So we didn't want that anymore. We wanted it to become a stable area. So the comp plan that was, and again, we weren't up to the 89 comp plan. We were still working off of the 2000 comp plan when we did zoning conformance in the city, was single family. So we rezoned those duplexes to single family. And the same problem happened. You had people who bought a duplex. You could be a legally non-conforming use. But if you lost your tenant for more than 60 days on one half of it, you couldn't re-rent that half. And you bought it as an investment, and it really, the area wasn't great, which is why they wanted to make it stabilize it. But I think that decision probably destabilized that community. And I say, I don't want to say I regret it, because I think the goal was to try to stabilize it, but the unintended consequences of trying to do the right thing, and I think it turned that community, it destabilized that community more so than it was already. Or
Who enforced it? Who was watching to see if it wasn't rented for 60
Oh,
days?
the electrical meters, the city.
Oh,
You know,
so they send
meter,
notice out?
yeah, yes, if you came in, I see a hand back there, Michelle.
Well, Lorraine, I'd like to remind you that that particular plan amendment that we did in zoning conformance in Sulphur Springs, the city council chambers were filled. In those days, we didn't have as much with the fire marshal. And all the way down the second floor, the first floor, out onto Kennedy Boulevard, because I was a monitor for that.
Oh, yes.
All the people saying, council, take that down to single family. And that was important too. I mean, you know, as planners, we have to have balance. And I think that, you know, as you feel bad, the thing is that the decision was made way back in the 70s without any planning and thought on what the impact could have been in a rural area. You know, 'cause that's what's so.
As we struggle in the
You know?
school district with the school we have there,
Yeah.
because of the transient nature of that school,
Exactly.
I guess that decision reverberates with me every year when I
Yeah.
see the results in that school. I don't tell them I had anything to do with it.
Yeah,
I blame Michelle.
She let all those people in the
It was
council
Michelle, she was there, she was one of our stalwarts in the zoning conformance program as well. Made it through that. So anyway, there's a, now you
Yeah.
cried with me.
Well, and while we're still talking, you know, I know there's another question about controversial topics and opposing views, but while we're still on the topic of the history of the comp plan and for both Tampa and Hillsborough County, I wanted to see if anybody had any specific questions about specific areas in the city that you've discovered, or the county that you think are a little bit strange, or why did that become that way?
Drew Park,
I was gonna,
let me,
Drew, so the question was Drew Park.
So I'll lead off. I had a plan amendment last year, and I dug through, I read that plan, Horizon 2000 plan, and then the subsequent plan. And it was really interesting. I kind of found out about Drew Park was a hodgepodge even back then. And when you guys were planning and you were trying to figure out what to do with it, you decided to just transition it to industrial. I think it's like light industrial, but there's still a lot of that remaining residential still there that actually had like never, I think that what I was reading in the 1989 plan is that there was a vision that it would kind of go away, so it was going to be non-conforming, but we had someone come in for a plan amendment on his apartment complex today. You know, it's just still kind of out there, so I just would be interested to hear your, if you remember the planning process.
Wasn't it mixed use? I think we made it,
It was.
a decision
It
by
was.
indecision.
But it went back, it went to light industrial, and you guys had statistics in that 89 plan, the number of nonconformities that would be created by that just kind of
Yeah.
have lingered for,
Michelle seems to remember.
yeah.
That was a policy decision that was made by the city of Tampa.
yeah.
The zoning code had it as light industrial. And Lorraine, I think you started off with the mixed use as a compromise, if I recall. And then in the 90s, the city of Tampa said, we want this area to be industrial. And even though we as the there are amendments where, of course, amendments don't reflect all the conversation that goes on between staffs, but I remember that your friend, Gloria Moreda, was like, we are going to implement light industrial in this area. Even though you're absolutely correct, and the compromise was, let's identify these people, these homes. Some lovely homes with, a vibrant neighborhood.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find
I don't get emotional, but,
I find that really,
hard.
I just find that really
Hard.
interesting, because when you read the plan,
Yeah.
you wouldn't have
No.
known that, because, I mean, this was in the 89 plan,
Yeah.
that kind of shifted it to industrial.
Well,
And
It's
I,
created a ton of
Yeah.
nonconformities
Yeah.
to force them to eventually phase out and then
Yeah.
become industrial.
I think you have to go back and
Over time.
understand what that was, though.
Yeah.
That was not Tampa International prior to World War II, that was Drew Field.
Right.
That was a military base, even
Right.
before McDill, I think, was created.
Right.
And they have Quonset huts in there from, the military period. And it wasn't separated so much from parts of it from the other community. I mean, Dale Mabry was just a 2-lane road that ended at Hillsborough Avenue, back in the 1940s. Columbus Drive was a 2-lane road that went straight. Columbus Drive and Courtney Campbell were straight. Remember, no Tampa International Airport. Drew Field, and then that became the airport. The airport was on Davis Island. That was the main airport for Tampa, was Peter O'Knight prior to World War II. So when that happened, now you've got, of course, Dale Mabry, this huge road, now separating where those houses were, and just other things that happened in that area. And they were left like a little island of residential kind of in one part of Drew Park. with all
And the
this
peak
other
pony, don't forget the
weird
peak pony.
development that had to do with the war. So that's why that's such a crazy area. It was thrown together to support that war effort here.
it looks like Jay has a question.
Jay?
Well, to go with this line of thought, if there was a policy decision for Drew Park to become light industrial, what was the policy decision in Dobyville and the policy decision out east for those areas along Broadway that were given the transitional use 24?
because that could have very well happened in Drew Park. We could have
So-
had that same.
So in the 90s, was that conversation raised when the conversation about Drew Park was occurring? There
You
are
mean
other areas
With
of the
those other
city.
areas?
Yeah, there are other areas of the
Yeah.
city that
Oh,
were given
yeah.
a mixed-use category that allowed residential and industrial.
But
I
Drew
think
Park
Drew
was just
Park-
given light
Drew-
industrial.
Drew Park had mixed use for some period of time, and then it changed to industrial. Because the city really wanted to push because of the impact of the airport, and the expansion of the airport. They really wanted to support that. These other areas, they didn't have that economic engine, so it was, I think, the economic engine, and correct me, Michelle, but it was the thought that these are support uses for the airport. We want to make sure we have areas next to the airport, and
That's what I recall.
that we want to support them with industrial uses. Out east, those are not economic engines like the airport, so they could, you know, let them decide their future.
How about the adult uses that settled in that area?
Well, thank you, Pedro, that
Was
was.
that a-
Well, that's because of the
Because of the
Right.
rules about the
Industrial.
distance
Yeah.
requirements.
Right.
Your
Unforeseen
residential.
consequences.
Unforeseen consequences.
Again, the unforeseen
So-
consequences.
Which is the same thing that's happened out on Adama, where you have
Correct.
unforeseen
Yeah.
circumstance of allowing adult uses out there, which is bringing that neighborhood down.
Well, I think, you know, we're all adults in here, so let me just say that in the 90s, the city of Tampa was trying to clean up. We had worse land uses in our city, and they were closing a lot of the industrial, the adult uses that were in the area. They went to the Supreme Court with that idea and lost. But they, yes. However, what stood was that there had to be reasonable places for these uses to be. And unfortunately, one of those places was Drew Park. That was also part of that policy. Out east, you know, because the city of Tampa really did try to say, we don't need these things in our communities, we have a different vision. So, yeah, it is definitely an unintended consequence of where they do proliferate today. But that was the compromise after Supreme Court fell in favor of the First Amendment rights.
But to go back to what Lorraine said then, so there was not a policy decision or a planning decision other than allow them to shake out themselves to see which way they're going to go.
Right, like with
Give
East
it up.
Broadway or something.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
remember what Lorraine just talked about as with the,
Economic engines.
no,
Oh, okay,
also
sorry.
with, it's a compromise.
Mhm.
Because what was it, the settlement agreements?
Oh, right, the second, yeah, sometimes it,
That was just, you know, your settlement agreements for the county were within. We had the Supreme Court say to the city of Tampa, you must settle this and have reasonable places. So that's the compromise. I mean, that's part of our world.
I always say to people that when they could challenge the comp plan, or they want to argue the comp plan with me, I always say, you know, this isn't the comp plan I developed. My comp plan's in my bottom drawer. You know, the plan I developed in the bottom drawer. This is the plan that went through the public process, and this is the result. You know, and now I draw lines for school attendance boundaries. And I can almost, it's not quite the same, but it's very similar sometimes, where you will draw a line and then it will go through the process, and it might get changed along the way. And it might not get changed by the school board, but it might get changed by other people higher than me who might look and say, no, you really can't do that, you gotta do this. And so it doesn't always reflect your vision. Your vision is to give them something to start with and take it through the process. It's a public document at the end, it's the community's plan. And so it should never be your plan, it never can be your plan, because otherwise that's a dictatorship. And if I was in charge, that's what would happen. That's
And
my
we had
plan.
much better planning than this.
I left my plan. Did you find it?
But you have a tiara, it should be your.
Does anyone have any questions about anything with the county specifically that you'd like to know about? I see the two county planners right here. I was asking you directly that question.
Do you believe him?
Most of the time.
You're not here, so she believes it.
Okay.
I've called you before. on
You
Zoom.
have called me before. Oh, sorry, Steve.
Just to verify.
Yeah, fact check.
Do you want to share the Keystone Odessa and Lute's colorful history?
colorful history?
Yeah, or like we got
Well,
sued over the community plan.
That was one of the areas in
Barrel
1989 that
pits,
the county,
rural.
the Pro-Development County Commission, I will say, at the behest of the development community, said, we're gonna need more land. And they increased densities up in the Keystone area, very popular area because of the beautiful lakes. And the density was increased. The Sierra Club filed a suit, and their suit also included the upplanting of the Geraci's property. And that was heard by an administrative law judge, and the result was the county had to downplan in 1989, or I think we did it in 94, it took a long time, because it got upplanted and downplanted, down to the 1:5 and 1:1 that you see today. But then we did community planning on top of that. So
Well, that came out of the lake study, though.
yeah, that was in 1999. So 94, so it got upplanned, it got downplanned, and then we did a community plan, and we kind of refined the edges of it because nobody wanted to screw around too much with it as part of that settlement with DC, what Sierra Club, because it was a Sierra Club. And many of the same people who are active out there today were active in that, and that is a water resource area and wellhead protection area. There's a lot of good environmental reasons why that area should probably remain in lower densities.
What's the lake study you mentioned, Steve?
Well, that was right before the community, well, that sort of
Yeah.
precipitated the community plan.
So tell us.
You know, a lot of the residents out there were concerned with all the development and the lakes and the environmental resources. So I think the Planning Commission and EPC got...
Swiftmud.
Swiftmud, that's right. Swiftmud got together and we did a study on the lake resources and the water resources because I think St. Pete had wellheads out there and they were drawing down water
Section 21?
for St. Pete. So we did a study to look at the land use and how that affected the lakes out there to protect that water resource. And from that, that's where the community plan came out. I think Laura Swain, Denise Lane.
She was Lutz, yeah.
She was Lutz.
Barbara Dowling.
Barbara Dowling.
Yeah.
Took the recommendations and the policy decisions out of the lake study and moved that to create the first community plan, which was the Keystone Odessa community.
We started that in 99.
99. But prior to that, there was the original community plan called the Central Hillsborough Community Plan.
Oh, yeah.
Now, that wasn't necessarily adopted as part of the comp plan, but it was a community plan that looked at several communities out in East part of county, Mango, Sefner, Limona, Valrico, Brandon, Bloomingdale, Durant. And it took all those communities and did in sort of an area-wide community plan talking about the infrastructure out there, economic development, environmental protection, and then there were specific policies for each one of those communities. And that was, again, it wasn't adopted as part of the community, part of the comp plan, but it was referenced in our comp plan to follow some of the policy directions for the communities out in that area. So that was done in '96, which is sort of a predicate to where we got into community plan.
Community planning that was really driven by all of the rezoning conflicts that were happening. And so to address those, the county said, okay, well, let's go ahead and let's look at the long-range visions for each of these communities so we're not standing here all the time arguing. We'll have an actual basis upon which to say what each community wanted to do in terms of zoning changes and land use changes.
Yeah, the unique flavors of each one.
That's why I got hired.
And was there a specific decision that led to the community plan starting to be adopted in the comprehensive plan?
Well, that was part of the board's rationale because of the zonings that were happening, is to recognize those community plans and make them part of the comp plan. So it had some legal standing. If the board wanted to deny a zoning, they could reference, that section of the comp plan that dealt with that particular community.
I think that was spearheaded by our executive director at that time to include those because he came from a place where they were included. And so he wanted those included. And there was a lot of pushback from the development community saying, hey, these were supposed to be just guidelines and now, and they got put, but I think that was kind of a push from this agency to include those into the comp plan.
Because the Central Hillsborough Community Plan wasn't adopted, it was, you know, more of a reference, more of a guideline. So that was somewhat of its downfall because it didn't really have that legal standing. I mean, the board could look at it, okay, that's nice, but they kind of didn't necessarily have to follow it because it didn't have legal standing as part of the comp.
They got developed, they started getting developed with that mindset of being guides, and then suddenly it was, and we're gonna put them in the comp plan. But wait, we didn't really make them to go in there. They didn't really get made, but then it was like, well, where are the development regs that need to go?
Right.
It needs to be related development, then you end up with development, so, I think
Well,
one of
at
the
that time, the,
Wamama Village
Wamama
zoning
Village,
and the Keystone
And
zoning
Keystone and the rural design guidelines that came out of.
Yeah.
growth management called for implementation of what was adopted in the comp plan on
Right.
the LDC side a year after the adoption. So that was kind of where that started work, but it never really, it happened in some places, but it didn't happen.
Right, I think it just Lutz and Keystone was the only places that really happened.
Well, it happened,
Well,
well,
no,
no, Riverview.
Oh, wow. Riverview, right,
Yeah,
Riverview did get their,
yeah,
right,
they
right,
did.
they did.
Yeah.
But again,
And Main
Russ-
Street has great
That-
Main
Right.
Street.
Right.
yeah, so that's, yeah, sometimes I see those odd things, like, what's that? Oh, yeah, that's those code things. But, I mean, my recollection, and it's pretty darn good usually, was we didn't really start out thinking those were gonna go into the comp plan.
No,
We started developing them as guides for the community, and the comp plan called for that, to let's create these specialized plans, but then it got, and we're gonna put them in, whoa, holy moly. And so, that's caused a little bit of conflict still to this day, I bet.
Yes.
I wrote,
So,
I wrote the lake study. That was one of the first things I was asked to do when I got here. Because the citizens out there were concerned about the quality of the lakes.
Right.
And my boss, Al Eisinger at the time, just hired me as the environmental planner, said, we need to study the lakes. So I studied the lakes.
right.
And then he participated in the Citrus Park community.
Oh, okay.
That's how he got
Lorraine,
shine.
what's the,
Wait, Rich has a question.
yeah, go ahead.
Actually, I had
Comment,
a
Travis.
question and a comment. I'll start with the comment. It's really more of an offer. So one of the artifacts I found in the desk that I inherited is a ruler that says zoning conformance on it, and I'm willing to sell it to the highest.
Well, Michelle and I, we never got anything special. We were never a special office of zoning
See me
conformance.
later.
Only Steve. I was a fill-in for zoning conformance. I had to go sit in their meetings, but I was not a zoning conformance planner.
My question, though, relates to, I guess, sort of the change in sort of the growth management regime, you know, state statute and so forth. Back, I think, originally, there was a very strong oversight on the part of the state. I mean, you referenced some of the decisions from DCA and so forth. That's all gone away now for the most part, but I'm just wondering if you thought that was, I mean, was that burdensome? I kind of got the impression that it's sort of a love-hate relationship with the state.
I would say, you know, they were so often, we use them so often as the stick to the elected officials to say, we got to do this because the state. On the other hand, sometimes good things we were trying to do, we couldn't do because the state, you know.
Right.
You know, I started with Plan Commission in 1985. That's when the most current Growth Management Act was adopted. And I'll be retiring any time now, so I always say, I have seen the life and death of growth management. My career spanned the life and death of growth management in the state of Florida. And my tenure living in Tampa has seen just about the life and death of 3 malls. I moved here, Tampa Bay Center opened, University Mall had just opened, and East Lake Mall opened.
East Lake Mall.
And now University is about to redevelop. So the life and death of 3 malls and an entire government program for growth management.
Well, and I've actually heard that that is one of the reasons that DCA, because DCA was always used as the excuse why we couldn't do things. Oh, well, sorry, developer, you can't get that because the state will object, and then they all went to Tallahassee, and now there's no more.
You know, I have to honestly say though, I think the replacement for that is a much more enlightened and powerful citizen group. I mean, when I think of some of the rezonings that don't get approved because of citizen involvement, I mean, I think finally there is somewhat of a culture of planning. I can't imagine a developer coming in with some kind of giant, you know, land use change or something like they used to do then. I just don't think it would happen. There would be so much opposition. Well, you got one.
RP3?
Yeah, but then,
Bring you on as a good.
I know that sounds big, but they used to take stuff that was 1 to 5 and go, you know, to 1 to 6 or 6 to 1 or something like that. They're modifying something that already has potential to have some density on it. And I don't know that that's going to go through. I think there's going to be tremendous opposition to that. The problem when you go back was, and why DCA was healthy, I mean, it really did build the strength of this agency, was having the state saying you had to have planning. They were still kind of trying to get rid of this agency still then, I think.
Oh, yeah.
And then, you know, going through all that, I was like the main witness in that whole that settlement agreement with the state, where I would have to go there and be grilled by the head of DCA. To defend something that actually down deep inside I kind of agreed with what they wanted to do, but it was like walking a tightrope kind of, because I was supposed to be representing the county and I was working with the county attorney at the time. You know, he was the attorney for it that would be up there with me. And I remember when they closed, like there was a room at the Planning Commission where we had hearings that whole week that I was in every day with John Dingfeller was the attorney, you know, defending against the lawsuit of the Sierra Club and you know, things like that. But I think there actually, when I drive around and look at things, I think how many great things have happened because this agency existed. Don't ever underestimate how this agency has made this area bigger. Because when the people talk about urban sprawl and all that, Orlando's got way more urban sprawl than we could ever dream of having. You know, as far as things being scattered all over creation. I mean, we had kind of an urban service area and we had planning concepts here. And I think we only have them because of this agency. There wouldn't have been a county department that would have fought for those things or mobilized the citizens. We've always, I think, been a citizen-friendly agency. And, you know, a lot of good things. I don't think the hockey arena would be downtown. We were the first agency, Jan Smith was the chair, that said it belongs downtown. It doesn't belong on Dale Mabry. That's, you know, they think, okay, but sports, it has to go on Dale Mabry. You know, so, because they always look for the easy way out, not like a long-range thing. And think of, you know, the changes that have occurred because of that. So, you know, we were involved in building in the streetcar through the MPO. You know, another controversial thing, but that's turned out to be a great boom for development of our center city. So a lot of things have happened because of this agency. They're important.
Does anyone have any questions about county stuff, city stuff? Well, I'll turn it back to the panel. We have a few more minutes. So, Rose, what general advice would you give about navigating controversial topics or dealing with opposing views? And maybe you have an example of a controversial project.
Let's see. I knew the Hyde Park one that I had expressed, that one really had differing views on it.
Did you work on the Davis Island Community Plan?
Yes, I did work on the Davis Island Community, the second one. The first one was developed back in the 70s. I think Ray was involved with it, with the South Center. With the second one, the Davis Island Plan, we had a task force of volunteers from the neighborhood that came. And we had several community meetings that we presented information, so we were gathering comments from a lot of the residents as well as the business owners on Davis Islands. That one I can't say was really controversial in any fashion. They pretty much wanted things to kind of remain single family in the area. It took a little bit of an education with a lot of people because some people have a difference of opinion in residential, saying, no, we don't want any more multifamily, we only want single family. But they want the best commercial possible. And I tried to explain to them, is like, you really need, you know, you're not gonna have somebody waiting on you at a table, you know, at a commercial, and they're gonna have to come from 10 miles away. You know, if you've got some multifamily around there, it might be some students that go to the University of Tampa, maybe they're gonna be working part-time in the commercial. You know, you won't be bringing a lot of traffic on, but everybody gets in their mind, multifamily means it's tons and tons of traffic. I said, you need a balance. What do you want? You know, if you want a really good neighborhood, you need single family, you want revitalized commercial, which means you need more people to support the commercial. So I think that was part of an education to really try to have people understand what makes a neighborhood. Even though they, you know, want certain things, it's like you need the balance a little bit.
There wasn't a lot broken on Davis Island either that really needed to be fixed.
No, Davis Island wasn't, but a lot of people were just concerned in terms of like, you know, more multifamily.
It was only when the hospital wanted to expand it.
Well, the hospital that wanted to expand, and part of the Davis Island plan really wanted to maintain a trail, kind of like through the island. We were able to get that, Tampa General Hospital, and we had a representative from Tampa General Hospital in the task force as well. And so they concurred and actually gave some money towards that task force, ultimately to build a portion of the trail down around the Peter Knight Airport. Gave it, and it went into the Parks Department, I think, the city of Tampa, so that they built it. So they understood the aspect that we wanted to have a major connection all around Davis Island to the Bayshore area, but the hospital had their plans also of how they wanted to develop. So in some instances, they couldn't get the connections all the way through, and I said, that's fine, you know, you just turn it. It doesn't have to go, don't read it literally, that it has to go all around the edge of the island. Maybe you can intersperse it through the campus of the hospital. It's the idea of connections. So again, it's part of understanding what people say, educating people as to what the ultimate goal is, and trying to compromise and find ways to achieve that. And that's probably the case with so many other things that actually occur. I had an amendment, thinking of amendments. It was one that Ray had stayed out of, so they gave it to me. It was an amendment off of Shelton Road, which at the time backed up to a creek that his house backed up to. So, and it was a request for an amendment to do some sort of major commercial, and the piece of property was really odd. It came off of Sheldon, and then it had like a flag lot that went up to Waters. And when I did the amendment, I don't look at just north, south, east, west. You take a bigger, broader perspective of what's going on in the area. So I went down to Hillsborough, where Sheldon intersects at Hillsborough. And what you had there, you had a grocery store on one side, you had a strip mall that was kind of derelict, you had another piece of property that had one commercial use. And then on the southwest corner was this huge site that was like parking. One building was a paint store. And when you looked at the plan and you looked at the zoning, in that big site, it was already commercial and it had zoning for this type of use that they wanted. So when I had done the report and we were going to go to public hearing with the Planning Commission, the petitioner withdrew their request for amendment within the week before the public hearing. Within 2 months, they had bought the site to the south because all they had to do then was pull the permits. They didn't have to go through an amendment. They didn't have to go through a rezone. They didn't have to go through neighborhood involvement, and it was a much better site. They built a Home Depot on that site.
It was Weaver's case, wasn't
Yeah. No, that was Keith Brickmeyer.
Yeah.
And that's the Home Depot
It was
that
the
went
Home
into
Depot, yeah, on
the
Memorial.
vacant Kmart that was at the corner of Hillsborough Memorial. But a couple things I think I want to reference, Lorraine knows about, is the North Del Mabry Corridor Plan and the
Adopt November.
and the Veterans Expressway Corridor Plan. Those are a couple plans that we
I
did.
remember that one
It
too.
still has lingering effects on our community today. Because if everybody knows, you know, how commercialized Del Mabry is, but it pretty much stops right there at Van Dyke Road, I do believe.
Yeah, well, it's at nodes after
That
that.
node.
It's at nodes after that.
But you
It's that
don't see all
strip.
that strip going north of Van Dyke Road, and that was as a result, and that was back in 1990, I think.
Yeah, 94, with Phyllis Kazanski.
It contributes to the fuckiness of what's known as loose.
And when the Expressway Authority was building the Northwest Expressway, which was called at that time, they called, the board called on the planning commission to do a plan because they didn't necessarily want to see the strip commercial at every little intersection. You might want to give some history on that if you want to.
Well, that was, essentially, they didn't want to happen to the veterans, what happened to the I-75 corridor plan, where everything on either side of it got high density just because it was next to this elevated roadway. So we came up with a plan to try to concentrate the development, which is the original plan that the Planning Commission came up with I-75, to come up with those nodes of activity and identify those, and then scenic corridor standards along the roadway. So the veterans, well, you see when you go drive up there, you can see that it basically doesn't have that high density up against it, just in a few key locations that have access. So I think that was really the result of, because it was going through such a sensitive area of the Keystone Odessa community.
Well, even farther south in the urban service area, I always remember the zoning at Linebow and the Veterans for the car dealer, represented by Vin Marchetti. That was a huge battle, and we won that one, getting them, they wanted to take it and spread it all the way to Wilski Boulevard or whatever, of all car storage and parking lots and all that stuff. And we fought that, and they built this car dealer that's actually vertical. Where they have a parking garage and the cars.
You see the cars,
in there.
the truck every once in a while, I drive up and I see the truck spinning on the top of the parking garage.
But that was a huge battle with Vin Marchetti.
And no, not only that, the county's development or planning director also said it will make no sense to have a car dealership that's vertical. You need, that the county was against us. And they wanted to spread that all the way.
But we used this plan
We said, no,
as the
you
basis
can't.
up to why.
Right, because I think that was just for office at that location.
Yeah, they got Bill Curry Ford, got their car dealer, and they must be selling Fords, I'm sure.
Yeah, they're still in business. They said they
Still
would
in
never make
business,
money, it would never work.
Right, it would
Well,
never
I
make
think the
money.
corporate just wanted them to get it done, to get our dealer, so they were more
They were
flexible. Okay, we
threatening
need
that
to
Jennifer
build it
Curry
up.
was gonna come after us. We're gonna get her, she was the spokeswoman. Yeah, they did. She's, you know, she's, come on, I think.
Right.
Thanks.
Is this kind of our summary, or do we?
No, this is great. I mean, we're actually right about on time, so I don't know.
I did want a chance to say something.
Please.
Okay. I just want to tell you, I'm sure most of you know the experience I just went through. I'm going to start a counseling firm for anybody, a planner that wants to run for office. To really talk to them about what it's about. The most difficult thing is, I will tell you, running for office is the antithesis of everything we've ever been taught in our planning career. Because in your planning career, you're taught to work with all parts of the community and to listen to people. This is not how politics works. You are taught to eviscerate your opponents with anything you can dig up or make up. This is, you know, it's a fascinating experience, because I was so naive going in there thinking you just show them how you could make the community better. But that's not the party. That is so not. You got to show them how you're going to destroy the other party, basically. You know, and go to the extreme. And, you know, I really realized that last night a particular candidate got up there, and his entire list that whipped this group up was naming every agency that he was going to sue if he got elected. And this is what people and if you've never been really involved in a party, which I haven't, because I've always even told the staff don't get involved in the parties. I never really knew what went on in the parties, you know, and it's not like they're so innocent and just want to make the community better. They think that's what they want to do, but they really want to just get power to get whatever it is they believe in, you know, happen. And it's not about ethical behavior or any of that. So many people immediately said, well, you got to do this. I said, well, that's like not right. You know, put your signs on empty lots. I said, I'm not going to put my signs on empty lots that I haven't asked the permission. Well, you got to do that or you're not going to win. I got in a big fight with this Sam. I said, well, then I'm not going to win. And the only reason, you know, it's not fun losing, it really isn't, but I did not deviate from that. If I had done some of that stuff that other people were doing, I would feel much worse about losing. But I thought, I don't want to regret doing this bad stuff that, you know, they're like driving you to do. I mean, you know, they want you to do polls so you know, okay, well, one person advising me, and they're legitimately like political advisors. This is what they tell people. They said, well, if you're behind, then you need to go negative. Or, you know, you had other candidates. They go, well, why aren't you digging up dirt, you know, on your opponents? I said, I don't even feel like I'm running against them. I actually like my opponents too. They're nice people. Yeah. So my message is, if you're a planner, I don't know. I really understand politics might not be the thing that we're trained to unless you can somehow get that out of your DNA. But when you've been for 35 years, you know, talking to people of both political parties and developers and citizens and all that, that is not the environment of politics. Maybe it was at one time, but I can tell you it's not now. Maybe it's a phase we're going through or something, but it's, you know, it's all about products. And the product now is someone much more aggressive and mad. I mean, you know, it's like, you know, you're selling a car and they're not buying convertibles now, they're buying SUVs. So if you're not an SUV, you're going to have a hard time selling a convertible. So, yeah, it's been an interesting experience. Yes?
I have,
Well, I was going to say, and I may be stealing some of Ms. Dickens' thunder here, but this is an interesting segue of a question I was wondering about. 3 of the 4 of you have been away from this building in one fashion or another for years. Lorraine, it's been about a decade now that
12 years.
12 years, and yeah, over at the school board. And so what I was wondering about is, in that time that you've been away from this building and away from the comprehensive plans that the 3 of you worked with so much more, if you were to walk back into this building and have another bite at the proverbial apple, what would be your first thing that you would look at these comprehensive plans and say, I've learned something in the last couple of years and this is what I want to change?
Yeah, go right
No, the reason, because one of the things that was in my campaign was that we needed to go back and look at the plans for the different communities. One thing I noticed, I went back and looked through them. You know, some of this stuff hasn't been implemented. I think those need to be re-looked at and maybe changed, or the county needs to come up with some kind of program to implement those plans. Because I realized that they did a lot of good things. However, you know, you get a group of people like at Progress Village, they still have this intense flooding and stuff, and that may have been mentioned in a plan that was done there, but I don't know if the county's done anything about it. So I think going back and looking at those plans and maybe tweaking them a little, and some of the issues might be different now, but having a program of actually implementing those plans. Because unincorporated county doesn't have cities. What I've learned is working in the region, you know, Pinellas County, I mean, has nice little cities that have different character and stuff. And the only way we have to do that is through our community plans. But if they have no teeth, or they're not updated or given strength or capital budgets go to implement them, they're not going to achieve the success that like a county like Pinellas has, or even, you know, Sarasota in some of those areas.
Well, I was going back to the first question. When you
Sure, and Wade has a question
Well,
too.
just following up on that, I was just wondering if you thought the suggestion recently by one of our commissioners that more areas should incorporate will get any legs to it.
I think that it shouldn't be so difficult for areas to incorporate. I see that now again, working in the other counties is somewhat of a weakness. You would want everybody to do it, but the idea of just having this level set of rules for a county this big, I don't think it's gonna create good quality. I just feel like the unincorporated county doesn't really live up. It doesn't look as good as what I see happening in some of the other counties. And you start thinking, why is that? Because they don't have city governments. I don't know, would Temple Terrace have gotten 56th Street, redone if they were just part of unincorporated Hillsborough County? I would suggest not, they wouldn't. So I think maybe that isn't, at least make it not completely impossible for people to do.
I 4 years ago, I moved to Pinellas County.
Yeah.
And into a little city, and one of those reasons was, and your thing, I mean, I had a long career in this county, and if anyone could peddle influence, you'd think I could. But honestly, there's no, I mean, people live in subdivisions. I live in Bloomingdale or Carrollwood Village or Fishhawk, and that becomes your identity, and that becomes what you protect. And, communities are bigger than subdivisions. And that's what municipal government gives you. It gives you the opportunity to influence more than your subdivision, but you have people who are responsible to you in a smaller way. That was the issue, in Hillsborough County being so big. But I'm going back to lessons learned, because not so much the comp plan, but I told you I was a city planner, city of Tampa planner. 1988, I got moved over to the county section, because I could see there was some consolidation going on. I didn't want to get left behind. So I made a move, made my own future. And I said, can I be on the county team? And because they had a generic team to do the comp plan. And I said, well, I don't want to be there, right? You think I could be on your team? Yeah. And that's how I ended up being on the team. And the lowest job they had, I was a planner too, was you had to go do the zoning meetings with the county commission. You had to sit there in 1988 with this county commission. You had to sit up there. Petrucha Shalowitz pushed me around, Nobody listened to the county planning commission. But then in 1989, like 6 months later, the comp plan was in effect, and the county attorney announced, whatever the planning commission says, you have to do. And here I was, a planner too. Oh, whatever I do, they have to do, more or less. They have to find out. So from that time until I left here in December of 2005, I sat with the county commission for almost every single land use every 2 weeks. I mean, I missed a few, but really 18 years I sat with the county commission. And during those 18 years, I also ran the county eventually. First, I was just the zoning person. Eventually, I became the county person. I ran the comp plans. Always had a few comp plans, but what I did was, I always told them the truth. I always told them what I thought. I didn't try to sugarcoat it. I said it nicely sometimes. Some of that really lied. But when those kind of commissioners asked me questions, I would tell them, this is, and sometimes they'd ask me, like privately, well, why should I support this? And I say, well, here's why. You probably don't like these aspects of it, but this is the aspects you do like. And the Lutz and Keystone Plan were a good example where the county commission, against some of their better nature, went along with the Lutz and Keystone plans. The one thing they didn't approve was they didn't limit commercial. The community wanted them to take no more commercial out there. And the county commission approved everything except that provision. And there were citizens who were involved in this who were crying in the hallway because the county didn't. Now, mind you, they approved everything else. And it was getting some bad press. And these commissioners who I said, this is good for you, this is good for you, and now people are, and so a reporter called me and I said, what you haven't mentioned is how they approved 99%. You're focusing on this. Why is that? Well, that's the thing that people care about. I go, well, don't you think you could add a sentence? And the next article had that sentence. And then I saw a particular commissioner who said, did you see that article? Because see, they are saying the truth. We did approve 9, and then that was their flag. They did it. And I helped them do it because I helped them approve a good plan. No, they're not going to do everything you want, but be a resource to them, help them get to the right place. And I'll be honest, I still run into some of these county commissioners, and people who disagree with you come and they give you a hug, Hi, it's so good to see you again. You know, I didn't always agree with her, but she always told me the way it was. She always told me the way it was. And if you can walk away from your career and say, that's what you need to do. Tell them the way it is and tell them why they should do the right thing. What parts maybe they have trouble with. So there's my words of advice.
Thank
You get a hug or two, Kate.
Well, thank you all so much. We're at the end of our discussion, but I think the panelists might be available to hang around for a few minutes if anyone has any questions.
We do have some
Oh,
parking
yes.
Okay, there you go.
Wow.
We don't have umbrellas.
We don't have umbrellas, yeah.
I still
But
have
thank
mine
you all
under the
very
floor.
much. Yeah, and can we get a big round of applause?
Oh, yeah, I got, you know, I got a couple of umbrellas that's going away.